and the hero's journey we all experience. Let's jump in with our host, Dylan Watkins, as he introduces today's guest.
Have you ever felt like your mind had a mind of its own, like it was addicted to things and you had no control of yourself? Well, in this podcast, you're going to learn about Christy Cosper. She is the owner and founder of Sono Counseling Centers, a mental health facility that works with an array of psychological problems. With over 15 years of experience in clinical psychotherapy, Christy Cosper has poured her expertise and personal discoveries into co-writing a book designed for healing and growth from addictive behaviors. Transforming the Addictive Mind book contains a variety of voices who have treated and struggled through addiction. The exercises, meditative activities, and narratives are written simply enough to follow while having the elements needed to foster honesty, compassion, gentleness with oneself and the relationship to others. So without any further delay, I'd like to welcome my friend, Christy.
Hi there. Hi, Dylan.
Hey, I'm so excited to have you on. I know we've been trying to do this for a while.
Yes.
And I am absolutely excited to talk with you about all things of the mind, mental wellness therapy, all of the crazy adventures you've gone on as well, and anything else that we get into. So,
Great.
cheers. I know you had a special request to bring alcohol into this session, so I have my glass of wine here as well with you on a happy Saturday as we're doing
Yes,
this.
happy Saturday. I love that. I'll have to make my cocktail. It wasn't necessarily a request to have the booze, but sometimes a little liquid courage because here I am on a podcast, Heroes of Reality, and sometimes feel like it's a scam for me to consider.
You feel like a fraud.
Oh yeah. The imposter syndrome is huge. And I see it a lot with my clients. And so getting through that is a big deal. But, they say that when you deconstruct imposter syndrome, you deconstruct it. And what lies underneath it is perfectionism. And then what lies underneath perfectionism is shame. And so that's something that's kind of an ongoing struggle. I think some of us deal with this, some more than others. I know I definitely have it. So
and the shame comes from self-judgment. Is that what it comes from? Is the I'm not good enough? Or
sure.
Other people will think
Sometimes it's there. It's hard to know where it exactly comes from. Sometimes it comes from our childhood. If we're not perfect, then there's hell to pay. I know some people have that experience. So everyone's a little different. But I'll show you my little travel martini set if you
pull it out. And I'll talk about this as you pull up the travel martini set and you're getting things ready. So
my friend Rosemary makes these, and she finds vintage 60s. This is from the 1960s travel kits, and she puts stuff in here. Whoa, like falling apart here. I'm not going to show you inside because I got to keep some mystery. But I wanted to say I love that photo of you in the beginning on your of the beginning of the podcast. It's so good. And then I gave you the one that you're using the one that I gave you. Which is the very chic photo because I paid for that, so I might as well use it.
I think I paid for that photo as well. I mean, there's sometimes you get these good photos that you can hold on to forever. Nice. Yeah, and what's really funny is like we were talking about this doing this podcast. You're pulling up the drinks and you're talking about being uncomfortable, like, oh, I feel like I'm a fraud. I feel like I'm not. I don't know what I'm doing. And what's so funny to me because as we were talking about it, it's like you run a multi-location counseling center. You run like more than I think a dozen therapists that are underneath you that you run through your programs. And then as we're talking about things, I asked you, where's your bio? And you're like, oh, you can get it on the back of my book, Transforming the Addictive Mind, and you can get that on Amazon. And I'm like, what do you mean fraud? Like, what do you mean? We're so harsh on ourselves, know. It's a really interesting thing to see as we're going through this because you have helped and treated and you do it as a profession and it's something that you
15 years. Can you believe that?
I cannot believe that's incredible.
I always make the joke that I'm not a spring chicken anymore. I'm a fall chicken. And so like I finally it's become that I've come to that age of like, wait a minute, how long have I been doing this?
Yeah.
So I started doing therapy when I was 25 years old, which is pretty young.
Wow.
For someone, when I think back on my 25-year-old self And even when you think about your 25-year-old self, you're like, oh my goodness, how far we've come, right? But it's kind of interesting thinking how long it's been and how much I've learned and how much I'm continuing to learn and how much I'm continuing to grow. I don't think the journey is ended for me quite yet.
It never ends. I don't think, I mean, even when you're, 84 or whatever that age might be going on, I mean, as long as you have purpose and meaning and you can find a reason to keep going with all that stuff.
Right.
And, I think people die when the purpose dies. When you feel like, and that could be at the age of 15, 25, 35, whatever. So as long as you can create your own meaning, which is crazy because like in life, we just create our own meanings. We're constantly going, this is what this means. And this is true. This is real.
Right.
This is 100% a thing. And it's not, it's just, we're just constructing our own narratives, which is I'm sure you could speak to quite a bit in actual narrative creation.
Right.
How did you get started in the whole, like, what was the genesis of counseling people and things like that? Like, what for you kicked things off to make you want to go out of ways and treating the addictive mind?
Yeah, two things. And it's funny, here we are having a cocktail, and there's a fine line between use, misuse, dependency. I guess I would say use, misuse, abuse, and dependency when you think of it in terms of, addiction to substances and whatnot. The addictive mind is mostly about sex addiction. And that's sort of been my passion, working with people who are sex addicts and their partners, the people that are betrayed. So working with betrayal trauma. So how did it get started? Well, see, this is where the martini comes in hand. So
Cheers.
My stepmother, God bless her soul, she's passed on at this time. She's I'm trying to think of when she died. She was young, in her 40s, died of alcoholism. And I remember, this goes back to kind of sort of my own pathology of codependency, being a kid and realizing what a true alcoholic really looked like and what it was like to live in an alcoholic family. And I had remembered always wanting to fix her. So whenever there was a Christmas present or a birthday present, I'd buy her a journal. I'm like, this is the time to start journaling. And it's funny. But she's like, oh, she hasn't stopped. And even my stepdad, actually, one time I got in trouble. I had snuck out of the house, and they thought I was probably 16 at the time. They thought I was, God only knows what they thought, but I had snuck out of the house to sneak to a 12-step meeting.
You snuck out of the house to sneak to a 12-step?
Yeah, that's right. Must have been about 16 years old, because I desperately wanted to understand what was happening in addicts' minds, and maybe that would help me figure out a way to save my stepmom. And unfortunately, she never did get saved, and it ended up getting her in the end. And I think that that's probably what unconsciously and now consciously started my desire and passion for helping people.
So do you feel like you're always trying to make up in some way for the fact that you weren't able to help your stepmom, and you trying to, like, you have that kind of that purpose through the pain?
Well, doing my own work and starting therapy in my 20s, I came to a place where I realized I had to accept her disability, really, and accept that I couldn't change it or cure it. And I think for the longest time it wasn't my desire. But I just think it morphed into, hey, let me see what I could do. What kind of prevention work can I do? Maybe this is what paved the way for me branching out into just specializing in addiction. And I would have to say it was her. So
Yeah.
she shaped my life, even though, I don't like to say good or bad. I don't like to put values on those words in life, but I think that, the light and the dark have to coexist.
It's meaning, good or bad or whatever. I mean, it's this meaning. She gave you meaning and purpose, and there's that effect where there was something that you really wanted to be able to do, and what's powerful about that is that you then think of all of her passing, right? And I think about this. I think about my father's passing, right? And I think
Mm.
about the meaning that it gave me, his last lesson that he gave me, and what it really meant to me, and why I'm on such on a kick to understand myself and self discoveries and master myself and things like that. Is that last lesson that they gave is usually the most powerful, and you don't want their loss of the parent to be in vain. And so you have like a powerful lesson, a gift that they give you, and the more that you can use that lesson, the more meaning that their death had, and the less, for some reason, the less painful it is. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. What was the lesson your dad gave you, you think?
So my father passed from smoking. Right. So he got cancer. He smoked cigarettes his whole life. Right. Beautiful, wonderful man, beautiful musician, great father, great family figure, all that stuff. Nothing. I looked up to him very much. But then he got smoking and he died. And even at the end, I was trying to talk to him. Hey, man, you might want to. He never stopped smoking cigarettes. And I was really sad to lose the guy. Like it was a very heartbreaking thing that happened to me, and it was something that like I felt powerless to be able to help it. And I was like, in ways, I was mad at my father because I was like, it was so selfish for him to die so early and so young, and to leave the family, to leave my mom, to leave my brothers, to leave my nieces and my nephews and everybody around us, that I was like, that sucked. Right. And the thing was, it's not his fault. But what I understood is that he couldn't master himself. He couldn't master his habits. And because of that, he left this world early, and he actually left a pain in our hearts. And I never want to do that to the people in my life. So I'm set out a way to actually master my own emotions, to master my own habits, my own abilities, so that I can be there for the people that are counting on me. So I can be a better leader, a better lover, a better friend, and a better person, because I don't want to cause the pain that he caused me unintentionally,
Mm.
because of his own ability to control his own habits.
Wow.
So, yeah. So that's my lesson, right? And it's
Yeah.
powerful, you know. And it's one of those things that for me, it's set a key. And I love the guy, and I don't. There's no like negatives. It's just a sadness, right? But at the same time, but that gift. And now I'm on these missions to do this, to interview heroes and to understand things and understand myself, and to inspire other people, for them to be able to pass those things along. Because I think one of the greatest tools we can ever give is our ability to master ourselves, our ability to believe in ourselves, our ability to actually view ourselves as the heroes of our own story, is one of the greatest gifts you can give to yourself or give to other people. And I think one of the things I like about with what you do is you're re-empowering people, where you have this addiction where you have no control. You are a victim to your impulses. You're a victim to the stories that affect you, right? And so you're empowering these people to master them. And so that's one of the reasons why I was excited to get you on and talk about these things, because I know this is kind of your world. So I
Hmm.
mean, and so like, how does that relate for you? Like, what are you taking from that?
Well, hearing your story about your dad, and and it wasn't that long ago, so I'm sure it's still fresh for you. I have to
Mhm.
imagine that mom passed a long time ago. Is well, kind of what's coming up for me is um, how hard it is to set your own boundaries and realize our individuation from other people's problems. It's hard for me as a therapist. It's also hard for me as a person. And one of the last, I do remember one of the last conversations I had with my stepmother. I hate to sound sort of grim about it, but I remember she was trying to go into rehab again, and I think she was trying to like weasel out of it or something like that, if I could remember. And she asked me, can I please stay at your house? And I was young. I mean, I was in my 20, I was 23, something like that. And one of the hardest things I had to do, and one of the most empowering things I've ever done for myself, was I said no. And I don't regret that, because I knew the truth is she would have robbed me blind. I mean, I mean, this is the nature of addiction. They cause people, when your brains are hijacked, you do wacky things. So,
Yeah.
not that she meant it, and she never talked to me again after that. And so
Wow.
I know it seems like, yeah, she never did. And I think sometimes we get our peace inner psychically. Doesn't always happen, but I do believe that there is something else after this, and that's just my personal belief. And I just think sometimes inner psychically we still have connections to people, even if we don't have their physical being here. And there's been ways to sort of repair that rupture for me anyway. Uh, but yeah, it's so I think that the power, the lesson that I learned from that is it's going to be hard to say no, but sometimes you better say no, or else someone's going to take you down.
It's that, yeah, well, there's 2 pieces. There's the tough love for them, and then there's the survival for you, and those are 2 different elements. The interesting thing about that is you're looking at that, there's something about the addictive mind. There's something
Mm.
about being a victim of this where you're desperate and you're hungry and and instead of coming into a situation powerfully being, you know what, I've got this. Even if I can't find a meal tonight, I've got this. Even if I can't, even if I sleep hungry or I sleep cold or whatever things is like, I've got this. There's that power. But then when you become a slave to your addictions, right? When someone doesn't give you what you want, they're now the enemy. Like your
Mhm.
mother's addictive mind turned you into the enemy for not giving her what she wanted because now you're the enemy for not giving her that thing, and that happens to a lot of us. And
Oh,
one,
sure.
you know what I'm saying? And how, like, and seeing those lessons, like, how do people tweak that? Like, how do you go from being that victim to empowering oneself? Like, what do those things
Are
look
you
like?
talking about being the person that sort of, and I think that we're all, there's little children inside of us. I think we're
Yeah.
all little children walking around in big people bodies, and it can get very dangerous.
I feel that way all the time. Yeah.
But so I think of that person as like a little child. Like
Mhm.
what they're doing is having a temper tantrum in an
Mhm.
adult way, right? In a big person way, in a big body way. You're not gonna give me what I want. You said no to me, so I'm gonna stonewall you, or I'm gonna, 86 you from my life and just blackball you, or whatever we do, right? It's a temper tantrum.
Mhm.
And it's hard for the person that's on the other end setting boundaries. Setting boundaries is so hard. People say, "Oh, set boundaries, set boundaries." Well, it's not that easy because usually they're not followed and you have to do it more than once. And the second thing is you usually look like the bad guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
That so it's hard. It's hard work. So
Well,
when I
there's
work with partners, like people that are in relationships, I didn't want to cut you off. Like
no, keep going.
people that are in relationships with addicts. So I work with both, right? And people, you hear the consensus of the culture, like, oh, well, just say no, or just leave the person. And it's not that simple. It's not that black and white. Especially when you have children involved, or you're sort of entangled in some sort of way. It's difficult to set boundaries. That is probably just as hard than overcoming an addiction.
Mm.
It's two parts.
Yeah, well, you're also addicted to that person's relationship, right? You're addicted to the emotional comfort, the social comfort that you get about having that person in your life. I mean, in some small way, we are each other, right? In some small way, the closer you get with people when you break up with them, whether there's significant other or a parent or maybe a toxic son, who knows, right? The having to separate from that person is like losing a piece of yourself, and that is super duper hard. And there's 2 pieces I want to touch on,
Sure.
one being the, like, is there frameworks for setting boundaries, right? That's one piece. And the other one is how do you switch from being the victim of an addicted mind to owning the story and actually empowering yourself to take ownership. Those are the 2 pieces I want to touch on because those are the 2 elements. And so there it seems like both sides. So either one of those that you want to tackle, I'd
Okay,
love to
yeah,
kind of
but
expand upon.
we'll talk about so this is perfect for me. I'm a Gemini. And
Hmm.
I think that's probably why I work with addicts and partners because the duality of my personality can kind of sift through them.
Hmm.
So let's talk about the partners first with boundaries. This is the formula. Boundaries are not boundaries unless there's a consequence. It's that simple. So for instance, hey, don't eat the last piece of cake in the fridge, right? So maybe a boundary I would have. Um, okay, well, someone eats the last piece of cake in the fridge. Then what? What are you going to do about it? Right? Um, the boundary has to have a consequence, and the consequence has to be enforced, or else it doesn't make any difference.
Mm,
And more times than not, we'll always have to set a boundary. Let's think about a child, for instance, right? Don't eat the cookies before dinner. Well, they're going to. It's just a matter of time. And so, okay, so what do we do? Okay, if you eat a cookie before dinner, then we're not going to have cookies in the house anymore. And then you don't buy cookies in the house anymore. Right? It's
yeah.
an example of how to actually set boundaries. Some people are so afraid of it though. Again, why is that? Because of the temper tantrum that occurs on the other side.
You don't
Or
want the conflict.
right, it's an avoidance of conflict.
Mm,
And in the book, we talk about avoidance. The book, just to kind of go into that, the book sort of is based on a Buddhist psychology philosophy, which basically says that all problems and issues and concerns in the world are boiled down to three things, and they refer to those three things as poisons. And one of those things is avoidance. The other one is ignorance, so such as denial. And lastly, it's attachment. So that could be addiction or attachment to a person. So the Buddhists think that, that those are the things that it all boils down to those three problems, those three poisons. So we try to find anecdotes to those. So what is going back to the second question, circling around to it, you asked, how does a person change their mind?
how do they own the story? How do they go from a victim to someone who feels empowered and takes responsibility for what's going on instead of feeling like they have no control?
That it's hard to say, and it's interesting your word choice, because a lot of the people that I work with, the addicts that I work with, don't really identify it necessarily as a victim because of the damage that they've caused in their life. If not, they would consider themselves more of a perpetrator than a victim.
It flips though, right? Like at first they keep doing it. Like, so imagine like, I want to, let me into your house so I can steal all your stuff so I can empower myself. Right. And then you're like, and then you don't. And there's that initial rage of not getting what you want. Right. And then there's that shame and guilt that come on afterwards that piles up. You're like, oh, I'm the worst person ever. Right. So that combination of like, that person's the enemy to I'm a terrible person. Right. And I feel like both those situations isn't owning the actual truth of the problem. So, and I appreciate you analyzing my words. Please call me out as I go through this process. I could feel it. I was like, oh, I'm under a spotlight. That's right. Therapy. Got it. Okay. But as we go through it, you're right. But I want to address neither one of those ones takes on the responsibility where, you know what, I'm going to own this. This is me. And I take responsibilities and it's okay. Right. That's not the same thing as either one of those situations.
Yeah. So I hear what I'm hearing. I'm gonna tell you what I think I'm hearing you say, and then try to the best answer.
Let's do it.
You say, okay, so what's the cure for addiction? And you know what? I don't know. I mean, I don't have that answer. I don't have a simple answer. It's so much more complex than that. It's not. And so I don't treat my clients like a textbook, protocol of this is what we do next. I try to get to them and know them as people and get to know how they tick, what they like, what's their dog's name, what do they like, what do they do for fun, things like that. I get to know their personalities because that helps me dictate the individual treatment plan. I'm not going to have someone, oh, you need to read this book when the person's not a reader and hasn't picked up a book since the 5th grade. That doesn't make any sense. That intervention's not going to work. But what I can say, a small little anecdote, you said, okay, you mentioned, oh yeah, I look like I'm a bad person if I go and do X, Y, or Z. So that's shame, right? Shame is I'm a bad person. I'm not worthy. And so one of the key elements that we try to do in therapy with addicts specifically is reduce the shame eventually. I think we need shame sometimes. Shame gets a bad rap because we're all about, ever since Brene Brown, right? It's like shame reduction. And that's all fine and dandy for the average banana. But when we're dealing with addicts and in particular sex addicts, we need that shame. We need to sit with it for a little bit and realize, wait a minute, what happened here and how does this feel sitting in it, and what do we get from that gift? There's a gift that we get from that shame. It's values, it's amends, it's humility, and those are gifts that people have now, resiliency tools that they can have to move forward. So what we do with that is like, okay, here's what you did, now we know, now we have the ammunition on the table, it's not going to hurt anybody, now we got to lean into it. We lean into the shame by what? Rigorous honesty. That's the only thing that I say to my clients is from now on, there is rigorous honesty, brutal honesty, because it hurt. The truth hurts sometimes, but most people can get over the pain of the truth, whereas they don't necessarily get over the pain of betrayal.
Mm. So the pain of of something that you've done, right? Some sort of shame about that you can lean into and say, okay, I admit here's where I'm at, here's what happened. But if somebody hurts you, some sort of betrayal happens, right? I associate that with pain. Or there's some sort of thing that happens, then that is harder to go over. What about that makes it hard versus the shame?
What, so ask the question again. You're what?
Wh- yeah, what about the pain of betrayal is more painful? What is it harder to get over about the pain of betrayal
Oh my
and
God.
tension?
Well, first of all, have you ever been betrayed?
Yeah.
It's, I already know you have. It's rough.
Yeah.
It's a phenomenon. It's hard to kind of capture the essence in words of what it actually feels like.
Mhm.
It really is a pain, not to quote Eckhart Tolle, but that pain body becomes very real, you know.
It it
Um,
it can
so
be, yeah.
because here's the thing too, like a focal conflict theory suggests that when we sort of lean into conflict, then we're going to have a heightened level of anxiety for a while. Well, not for a while, but an increased level of anxiety immediately, but then it dissipates and it's gone. Whereas betrayal and betrayal trauma is something that sort of lingers. It's not linear. It comes and it goes, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, so I wanna talk about it. You said focal conflict theory.
Uh-huh. It's a type of theory that I try to use when I'm in group therapy and doing group therapy.
And focal conflict theory is the fact that there's a tension and then a release? Is that what it
Yeah, you
is?
can think of it like that. Well, geez, when you say tension release, I always think of like something sexual. So like I have,
Maybe. I mean, there's some
but yeah, kind of. So the idea is, and you can think about how this plays out in our daily life. Let's pretend you have beef with somebody,
Okay.
okay? Wait, it happens if you've been alive long enough. You have beef
Yeah.
with someone, but it's not like that bad, but you feel it. You feel the charge, right?
Yeah.
So you have one or two options. I always think of this as like a decision tree, and this comes from the theory. The decision is, okay, do I just avoid, right, the poison of, do I just avoid it and then not deal with it? And sometimes that's the answer, because sometimes you see somebody at a party or you see someone at a social event or a work event, or and you're like, oh, it's not worth it, and you avoid the situation, and that's fine. But the beef is always there, right? You've that charge is always there. It's just a little bit, but you could manage it. You're like, yeah, whatever. But sometimes, and at some point, that, and you know what I mean by when I say beef, right? That
Mm.
charge
Yeah, there's an
becomes,
animosity. There's a
yeah,
narrative story in the back of your mind that's eating up, like, 5% of your brain or
right,
whatever.
sure. And
Yeah.
sometimes we deal with it. It's manageable. I call it
Mhm.
the moderate level of anxiety, right? But then sometimes there's people that really bug us. Or maybe it's a beef that we have with like our significant other or a best friend or a family member. You can't avoid it. It's impossible. You could try, but that anxiety grows and grows and grows and grows. So what you have to do is you have to lean into it and you have to acknowledge it and you have to bring it up. And let me tell you, that's gonna suck. But once you get it is, that's the fact. But once you get to it, that heightened point of anxiety where you're like, oh, here it goes, I'm gonna like talk about it because I can't hold it in anymore. You talk about it, maybe you get into a huge fight, maybe you don't, you talk it through, whatever the case may be, it's gone.
Mhm.
It's over.
Yeah.
So so it's kind of going back to like leaning into the shame. The better someone gets at talking about leaning in and sort of even processing what someone has done, if it's even a perpetrating behavior, um, the shame will go down and it becomes more manageable for both parties actually.
Mm. I mean, that makes a ton of sense because the way that I just think about it is like I think, you're. This is probably not an accurate analogy or whatever, but this is just the way I think about it. Is that we all have these storylines, these narratives running through our head, right? And when you have them built up with relationships with people, right? And And after you have so many, you go through some sort of survival mode method, right? Where it's like, especially with difficult conversations, and usually the difficult conversations is a combination of something that you have the feel that you want to communicate, that you're afraid to communicate because you feel that they're not going to receive it well, and there's a consequence. So a kid talking to their parent about
Sure.
something that they may not approve of in the chat, there's some sort of power that that person has over you, significant other, parent, boss, whatever it might be. And then what happens is these stories, and it goes through this with those R's, right? The resistance, resentment, rejection, right? And it starts to build up. And so if you don't open up the floodgates and let that out, you go to try to talk to them, and like 95% of your brain is taken up with all of these stories of why this person is the enemy. And then you just unleash. And so instead of dealing with it at 5 or 10 and whatever percent. And so I always look at that. And so I go, okay, this is built up to a threshold where it's needed to be talked about, because otherwise we can smell the energy. You can feel it, you can taste it. And for me, I went from running away from a lot of the stories to where now I kind of seek it out, and I will grab someone, I will hold them, and I'm like, let's have a conversation about this. We need to talk. We need to get through this. Maybe a bit much. But I want to get through this because I am kind of addicted to the resolution part, right? The
repair.
Yeah, the repair part, because I know that feeling feels so much better. I don't do it perfectly all the time, but it's so
But
that's why I think
the point is what's hard in what you're saying is, for most people, they rob themselves of that feeling when it comes to repair, because the only way to get to repair is going through that momentary anxiety.
Is that why the betrayal is so hard? Because you never get a chance to repair?
Betrayal is complicated, right? There is a person that may be betrayed, and I don't know what that would mean to somebody, right? It usually implies and there's an intent behind it. Then there's people that I work with specifically who have betrayal trauma, which is kind of a whole nother ball of wax. It's a complex trauma, and it takes quite a while to help heal it, because when someone's been betrayed, your brain is rewired. That's it. You will look at the world through a different lens. You don't look at people the same way anymore. And you're changed. So there's not one answer of how why is it so bad. I mean, I think the healing process is not linear, the same way it is for addicts. You stop using, you have sobriety, and sobriety in of itself, by the way, is not enough. In my opinion, there needs to be more that's done, because usually when there's addiction, it has weaved its way into sort of every the daily life and how someone lives. So they have to do a complete I don't know, maybe like this side of a emotional lobotomy in a way, right? Where they have to sort of take some parts of them out, and usually their growth is linear, more or less. Success in treatment is never linear for the betrayed partner or the addict necessarily, because there's relapse, but there usually is a progression over time, where you don't see that with betrayal trauma and complex trauma.
So it keeps coming back, because what I've seen, at least for myself, is with the betrayal piece, is if I can find a gift in the lesson, and if I can find gratitude for the person who betrayed me, I generally recover a lot quicker. And I may not get being heard from them, but if I can hear myself, there's a power in that. So like if someone betrayed me, and they did something that they took my trust, or they did something like, okay, well, what's the power in that lesson? And if I can find that, like, well, they made space for new people, and I'm grateful because they gave me a new opportunity. They put me on a better path. I became better because of that. If I can find some sort of power in that lesson, and I can give myself the gift of gratitude, and I can go through, and it's not easy, but but first it's kind of digging through the dirt, right? And you kind of like let out all of this, like, how do you feel about this person? Like, this person sucks. You just like rage it all out. And then you look for that gift, and then you can find that gratitude, and you can be appreciative for that person, especially if you can actually contact that person and communicate it. I don't know. For me, that betrayal becomes a lot less after I go through a process like that. That's it. I've gotten that. Otherwise, you'll never get a chance to be heard, and you never get closure. And that's the thing that I think that comes back, is that story comes back and like, why'd you do this to me? Right? It's that perpetual victim, for myself, perpetual victim mindset that comes back up. That is like, the world's unfair. This is unfair, versus going, actually, that was a good thing. That was useful. That was beneficial. That helped me in some way, shape, or form. So I've had betrayal in the past, as we all have. But for me, at least, that's what I've seen to be benefits. I don't know for you, of what you've seen to be most beneficial for recovering from betrayal.
I think you're a very big person, Dylan. I think you're, I think you have a lot more, grace and maybe resiliency than most people. So I typically don't take that approach with my clients that have had betrayal trauma. I mean, some people just need to fold like a tent, and that's it. And that's the end of it.
Yeah.
So I feel like sometimes it could be a little Pollyanna to think of
I understand that.
the trauma, like people that have been severely betrayed in those terms. And I can't, in good faith, sit with someone and say, hey, let's try to find the strengths or the gifts out of a situation, because sometimes situations are just crap. And for someone to want someone to, like I said, not succeed or fold like a tent, maybe I do too, and that's okay. And that's okay. I think of all this idea of forgiveness, it comes from these Christian underpinnings of our culture. And yeah, it sounds like a great idea in theory, but how does it actually play out in real life? Like, feelings are feelings. If we're angry, let's lean into that anger. Let's embrace that anger. What does that anger giving us?
Yeah.
Anger gives us strength, energy, assertiveness, and sometimes coming up with having a client of mine, for instance, or someone that's experienced severe betrayal trauma, asking them to come up with the gifts that they've gotten from this horrific circumstance could be actually re-traumatizing and minimizing to their experience from my perspective.
But yeah, I wouldn't go straight into it. Otherwise, you're kind of like the people that say that they're woke and everything's okay, and they just kind of smile and go, everything's okay, and you can tell that they're holding.
I wouldn't go straight into it or in it at all.
Yeah. Well, that's just things like.
all.
Well, I just think about it as like you're trying to hold like this unresolved pain below the surface, right? And you're like holding down all those balloons, right, underneath the water, and you're trying to hold that down. And if you're just, everything's great, no, there's nothing underneath the water, right? I feel like you got to get all that stuff out. So whether that is raging or crying or screaming or yelling or
Right.
shouting or running until you drop until the ground hits, but you have all that energy, you got to dig all that stuff out. And then at the end of that, then I go through the process of going, okay, where is this at? And I'm not saying that this is the only thing that I've seen for myself to be beneficial is that. Otherwise, there's that it kind of pops up like a balloon, where you're like,
sure, and I can see it working, and I've done that rage to gratitude exercise for myself actually, and I can see how it works under certain circumstances and for certain people. But remember, I was saying we got to look at people holistically and what are their needs and where are they at. I think it's great if someone's been burned. I'll use that language.
Yeah.
I think complex trauma requires a little something different.
When you're saying that, like you're saying, you're getting to understand people holistically, right? You're understanding all pieces of them, right? So what are you doing? Like, talk me through that process. So if you're getting to know somebody, right, and they have complex trauma, they've been betrayed, they've been set up, other things have happened in the world, they're addicted to things, and they're just a hot mess, right? As a technical term, a hot mess, right? And you're trying to understand them, right? What are you really trying to, when you're trying to assemble the understanding, like, what are you really trying to understand so that you can provide some sort of solution? Like, what is the pathway? Because I feel like, that they're here, they're at some point in their life, you want to help them get to another point, which is feel better, have less, like heal this trauma or do something with it, right? What are you looking for to make that map? What does that look like for you?
Just to get, first of all, I was feeling territorial over my clients when you were talking about this. I think if anyone's like going to be the hot mess, it's probably me in the room over them. If anything, I have so much respect and compassion for them, because they, however the hell they do it, they hold it together against all odds. Their worlds get turned upside down, and they're still, getting up in the middle of the night to feed the children, for instance.
Mhm.
So I never think of them that way, as a hot mess. I think of them as like, wow, how are you doing it? How are you doing it?
Mhm.
I'm probably more of the hot mess. And what do I do? I mean, I think it's like, what happened to you? Just tell me your story.
Mhm.
Through the narratives and through our own narratives, we get to know each other. And I do something that I do in my therapy that I do less in my real life, is I listen.
The time to listen. Oh man.
Because if you know me in my real life, I'm a huge blabbermouth, right?
Uh-huh.
And I don't listen. So
You can. I've seen you switch gears. I
you
mean,
have? Oh, good.
yeah,
Let's
but
hear.
it depends if you feel like if someone feels like they're in need. Otherwise, you're a very fun-loving person. That's one thing that's
Yeah.
saying you have a great time. You like to have a great time, make sure everybody's having a good time, and
Yeah.
it's great. But I've also seen when people are in pain or they're suffering or whatever, I see you switch gears where you
Yeah.
turn into like, hey, this person needs me, and I'm there for them, right? And it's been friends and other things, which is beautiful and wonderful. But yeah, and at the same time, like we all have moments. There's not something that you are labeled a hot mess. I mean, I've been a hot mess. We all have it. There's moments, right? There's moments. But when I think of complex trauma, I think of, oh, this is a hot mess, right? And I don't mean that as a,
Oh my God.
it's not a disparaging thing,
I
but
don't
I've been there.
ever
Where
think of it like that. I think like,
at a time,
we got a mountain to climb. That's how I think of it. That's how I think of it. But I always
yeah,
equate everything
I
to
like that.
mountains.
And as you climb mountains in real life, I know you do climb mountains in real life, and that is, I think of it the same way. I really do like that analogy because you're like, okay, I'm here and I want to get there, and it's going to take a ton of effort, you know. And there's a power in it. I was just trying to say, like, how do you Sherpa people up the mountain? Like, what does that look like? How are you helping them to?
Slowly, very slowly. In Nepal, they have this language. They say pole pole. To get up a mountain, it means slow, very slow, very slow.
Mm,
Pole pole is kind of the thing I have in the back of my mind. We get there slowly. We get there one step at a time, and that's how
mm.
it's how I climb mountains too, right? I'm like, okay, if I could just take one more step and then another step, I'll eventually get there.
Oh, I know. We've climbed some mountains together,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so yeah.
It'll happen, but might hurt on the way. It might hurt. You might get you might get hurt. You might get lost. You might have to change trails if there's a trail that's closed. You might have to put on some crampons. You never know. You never know what you're gonna have to do.
What do you think are the common mistakes that people make when they're trying to get from A to B? Right? What do you think are the things that they?
I tell you, just in general, like with the population, or
I mean, I don't know. Besides general, what
what I think it is.
Huh?
And this is in therapy
Mhm.
and in real life. And therapy is real life, but I try to have my two separate worlds.
Mhm.
They give up. They give up. I think that's the number one problem. And so many times I've seen clients not really prepared to do the work they need to do. And that's okay. Maybe they're not ready. Maybe they'll come back. Maybe they'll come back when they're ready. And a lot of times that does happen. But same thing on the mountain. I mean, I think I've had this experience with you. We've been on the mountain with someone and we're like, oh, I can't do it. But there's altitude sickness. Someone doesn't feel well, or they just can't do it and they give up. And like, let's go down. We don't need to make the summit. They give up.
Yeah.
More times than not. I'm not saying that there aren't real variables that get in the way. There are, but you're asking me what's the one thing, and I'm going to just say that.
Yeah, and this is broad stroking terms, and you're right. We've seen people give up while climbing a mountain, metaphorically and in real life, and it's painful to see because you want to support them, and the natural instinct, at least my instinct, is to push them, right? And that's probably not. I'm gonna say it's not the way to do it. There's ways to inspire or lead people up the mountains, and if they can, if not, it's ultimately their choice. Like you don't push someone off of bungee jumping. If someone's bungee jumping, you don't shove them off. It's got to be, at the end of the day, everything's got to be your own choice.
Oh yeah. Oh my
them.
God, that's true. I did bungee jump one time.
Yeah.
And I'll do it again as long as I live. It took me like 20 minutes. But I remember being, on the edge. They're like, "Don't touch me! Don't touch me!" And I guess they're not allowed to, right? But I
Mm.
didn't know that because I was like terrified. If someone was gonna just push me off, don't touch it. It took me 20 minutes to jump off that thing to get the
Where were
courage.
you at? Where were you at? Was that New Zealand?
I was in New Zealand,
So
and
you were at the world's tallest bungee jumping?
it wasn't the tallest, but it was
Okay.
where bungee jumping was invented.
Oh, okay.
So it was the very first bungee jump ever invented, and it was on the South Island. So it was my friend Kristen was doing it, and she said, "Do you want to do it with me?" I said, "Oh hell no, I'm not doing that. I have no desire." But I was riding bicycle by, and we rode by the bungee the day before, and I'm like, "Oh, that doesn't look so high. I can do it." And so I signed up. And once you're up there, you're sort of committed, because I also didn't. I felt guilty because I hogged up the line and people were waiting for me to jump. So like, I have to do this, and I had to dig deep. I had to dig deep. But but they don't touch you, and so you're right. You're right.
You can't be pushed. You gotta make your own brave leap
You
forward.
know, what's funny about that is I actually, from that experience, I use something that they taught me on that bungee to my clients in therapy right now.
Mm.
They told me that day, this is how experiences, by the way, shape you, right? Because I still remember I said, "Don't touch me, don't touch me." I'm like yelling and freaking out, I'm sure. And I have it on video somewhere. And they said, "You're not even close to the edge. You're so far from the edge. You're not even there yet." And sometimes when my clients are like, "What are we doing next? What are we doing?" I'm like, "Wait a minute. We're not even close to the edge. We're not even there yet." And I sometimes catch myself saying that because I know what it feels like to anticipate the jump.
Mm.
And I remember what it felt like to when they said, "You're not even close to the edge. You're okay." I was like, "Whew, I can breathe. I'm not there yet."
You have to feel that pressure. You have a little space, right? It's like creating that space in the moment, right?
Right. Right.
And that's a really powerful lesson. Looking at that and looking at how you say the biggest issue with people is that they give up. They give up on
Mhm.
themselves. They give up on themselves. They don't believe in themselves to make the jump, to make the climb, to move forward, to break up that relationship, whatever it might be, they give up. So, how do you help people find the courage to carry on? Right. One of the tactics, right? You just talked about bungee jumping, was you're not even near the edge, which gives them space to kind of calm down and gather
Mhm.
themselves. Are there other things that you help people encourage
Yeah,
them and help?
I mean, not to get into all like the theory, I sometimes will use, motivational interviewing to help
Mhm.
them see the benefits of why they're doing it. I help them, I kind of will share the rationale of why we're doing it. What's the point anyway? I sort of bring in the existential piece of like, hey, has meaning. And then I always go back to Winston Churchill, when you're in the middle of hell, don't turn back, keep walking. I always tell them that. I say that all the time because it's the truth. Like, you're stuck there in the middle. Like, now's not the time to turn around.
100%. That's a good one because you're reframing, you're refocusing, and that's a but that thing is like if you could find those little pieces of lessons, right? Like,
Mhm.
and what's interesting is, um, like depending on how you got the insights, it depends on how powerful that lesson is for you. Because you can go on Instagram right now, and you can go to motivational posts, and you can scroll all day long and say, "Oh, that's a cool quote. That's a good quote.
Mhm.
Wow, that's a great quote." It means absolutely nothing. I can't think of one quote that I've pulled from Instagram to actually leverage to pull me forward. But what you got, that thing of you're not even near the edge yet, right? You got that in a true moment of terror,
Sure.
right? And you can pull that.
Right.
And
Yeah, you can
that's
say
thing I
that.
was
That's
like,
really
so then,
true.
like adding that meaning, like adding that, how do you add that power to the lesson, right?
It's hard in an office setting. So, so I believe in an existential learning theory, which sort of basically it's that, our learning is solidified and crystallized when we have an experience to tie on with it. So if I read a mechanics book, right, how to change a carburetor, right? I read about it, I'm still not going to really be able to completely figure out how to do that unless I was read it and then had someone show me and be practice in real life how to do it. Then I'll know how to do it for real, right?
Mm.
And so in therapy, we try to recreate some of those experiences through different interventions. I like to bring in a lot of Jungian work and sand tray work. We're actually, Sano is doing or having a workshop. It happened last weekend and it's happening next weekend. It's a Facing the Shadow workshop. It's a 6-day intensive, and it gives people out of the office and into a group setting where they could have some experiences with different people, and through those experiences learning is crystallized. So that's an example of how we try to use the office setting and be creative with how to make the learning more experiential so people can have that transition.
So that's really interesting. And looking at that, so I mean, you're talking about if you can experience it, not just talking about it, not just knowing it logically, but actually to see it, to practice it, to feel it, to experience it has got more of an impact. And I love facing the shadow. I mean,
Mhm.
it's an amazing concept because it's the last thing we want to look at, right? We all want to talk
Sure.
about the beauty and the peace and the wonderfulness. So I love the facing the shadow. I want to do a little exercise with you. I want to kind of
Yeah.
look at this and say, just because you know me, right? I'm a VR developer. I build virtual reality experiences and things and stuff and so forth and so on, right? I actually designed one of them inside your office while you're away. You were kind enough to let me use your office,
Oh
and I was
yeah.
working with my nonprofits, and it's something that we still work on today. And
Oh
it's so
yeah.
great because it was drawn up in the boards inside your office, overlooking a beautiful, beautiful scene. But looking at some of these experiences, I'd love to translate this and do a little exercise. If what are the experiences that like facing a shadow, what does that look like? And I'll try to kick that back in my own words in VR, and we'll together try to co-create what would something look like this in VR as just a little thought
Okay,
experience. And
we could do it. So I have to give a shout out because the Face in the Shadow actually comes from a protocol written by Patrick Carnes,
mm,
who is the trailblazer in sort of bringing sex addiction to the forefront of our knowledge and bringing it up like, hey, this is a problem and we need to
mm,
look at it. And so the Facing the Shadow workshop is based on his book and his research and some of the tasks that he thinks addicts need
mm.
to achieve in order to reach recovery. So I gotta say that, but we'll play your game. So okay,
Sure, sure.
so
Yeah, yeah, shout out to Patrick. Thanks, brother. Appreciate this.
yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah.
that's awesome. So yeah, so what does this look like? If you could give me like a bit of a mental walkthrough, and then I'll say this is what it could look like in VR, and I'll kick it back to you, and then we'll go back and forth, and we'll play a little game here.
So facing the shadow is a relational experience. It's I would say it's a third psychoeducation. So there's teaching component.
Mm,
There's a third process, which means you kind of just talk about what comes up for you. And last would be an experiential component.
mhm,
So they're literally writing things down, they're drawing things, they're acting things out. There's a trauma egg that's going to be done this coming weekend with people, and a sexual fantasy timeline, for instance. So they have to draw out their sexual fantasies. They're going to draw out an egg that's filled with all their trauma, and they're not allowed to use words. So there's like an experiential component to
mm.
that.
So
So
then,
so I would say it's broken up into those three parts.
got it. So it sounds like what you're doing is you're kind of having them take baby steps, micro movements of them expressing what are their feelings, what are they going on inside their minds, right? So you take first something as which is fairly detached, which is a writing prompt, like maybe what is your sexual fantasies that you're not willing to communicate or whatever that might be, and they're writing it out, right? So that's a mini hoop to jump through. The next one is drawing that, right? So now they're expressing that in more of a visual terms that it then they start to now communicate that to a higher level, and then the acting it out is that embodiment of that third level, which now makes it more of an experience, right? Then it allows them to kind of fully experience what that's like, and then
Right.
you have this egg, which is kind of like the trauma of what it is. Is that correct? So what
That's
that
just it would be another experience, I would say. It's one of the activities that's experiential.
mm,
So it's usually an experiential activity is the best
got
way to
it.
put it.
So then if
And
I was
it could be done in VR
mm,
actually, because well, one, you can create, right, with the senses a feeling, and also they could be prompted to do the activities on their own.
mhm. And this is a group setting, or is this a?
Yeah, it's group.
Got it. So then, if I was to communicate to you, this is what I would do. Something like this in VR, right? If this was facing your shadows VR.
Hmm.
So everybody puts on their headsets. They're all remote. They all meet inside a shared group space, led by the amazing Christy Cosper. And say, okay, great. Here's what we got. Facing the shadows. This is a multi-step exercise. We're going to be meeting in this group room. We're going to be breaking off into our own private meditative spaces, and then we're going to be coming together to also collaborate and co-create and share our insights. The first step is going to be the writing prompts, and the writing prompt is going to be based upon your sexual desires or fantasies or things that you maybe don't feel safe to talk about. So we're going to break off into your own rooms, and you're going to speak into this orb. You're going to speak into this orb what fantasies and desires and hopes and thoughts you have. Why? Because writing in VR sucks. So if you can speak into this orb and you can actually get those words out, that would be the first step. And you take that orb and you can bring it in. If you're brave enough, you could share it with a group of people. I don't know if you share those writing prompts with people, but you come back in like a hub and
Yep.
spoke. You share that. And then you go, okay, great. Now the next step is we're going to take that fantasy that you draw and that you shared, or that you've communicated through the talking sexual orb, and then you're going to go off, you're going to draw what that looks like. And then everybody inside VR has their own drawing pens, because you can draw inside VR, and there's drawing tools. And then you could draw out with stick figures a crude and ugly. So everyone's got X amount of time, let's just say 15 minutes or whatever, to draw these things out. They break off into their own rooms, do it, take a photo inside VR, come back, share that photo with everybody, describing what it is and looking at it, and go, oh, that's great. Awesome. Now, the third thing, what we're going to be doing is going to be acting those things out. And I don't know if that's with people watching in the group setting or not, but if it was, then you'd hit a button. There would be some sort of risque scene. Maybe there's some 10 of the most common sexual scenes, and maybe that's at home, in a car, behind a dumpster. I don't know. Whatever those situations are for those people. And then they actually go and they can act those things out, either on some sort of mannequins, and they're actually going through those motions, or they could be doing role playing with other people in VR, and with you, either you have actors or whatever that thing might look like. Then they can go and practice those experiences, and then they can come in as a group, and then they could share that one by one, and they could share that along with a pre and post survey of, how do you feel about this? What are your associations with shame or guilt or things around this? Level that 1 to 10 into intensity. And then after the experience, you can then post rate that to see if you're actually making a dip in the actual process in terms of the emotional impact and your willingness to share it, communicate, and any shame or guilt you have around it. That would be my thoughts. What's your takeaway on that?
I love everything you're saying, but you lost me a little bit at seeing the sexual acts. Because remember, this is for sex addicts, so pornography is off limits completely. So showing any kind of sexual act of any kind would be really dysregulating and would be considered a relapse. And some partners may have some beef with that. So, but
It's gonna be acted out then. No, it's great. It's great. This is helpful. I was trying to figure out, when I was seeing it acting out. When you tell them to act it out in person, are they watching each other act it out, or how? What do you mean
No,
acting it out?
so I don't think that, yeah, I think it's I guess sometimes I have to remember my therapy jargon sometimes doesn't always translate. So sometimes we'll do an exercise called sculpting, and it comes from Virginia Satir, where
Okay.
she would have someone like sculpt. So like for instance, I would be someone might say I'm angry, so I might sculpt myself, right? Make a face and like do this with my hands and stand there like a statue. Or somebody else might sculpt me, like saying, "Hey, this is how I experience you," and they might sculpt me like that. That's what I mean by acting things out. I know we do another activity, a removing hats exercise, where we try to bring up the judgments that we make about each other, and then we sort of give us the space to take away that judgment and get to know people for who they really are.
Mm.
Because as people, we do make judgments about others. We make judgments on how someone sounds, how the bag of bones people carry around. We make judgments all the time.
What about that is, I just want to know, just to elaborate on that, the 6-day Face Your Fears workshop. What is the result that they get out of that? What do they?
Well, usually that book kind of covers therapy tasks that are to
Mm,
be accomplished by addicts, and that would take and if you came into therapy once a week,
mhm,
it would take a year to get through it. So those 6 days sort of, number one, capture a whole year of individual therapy, I would say. The
mm.
other component is you have the other people to bounce yourself off of, right? And sort of, and Yalom talks about this in interpersonal theory, that when our self-esteem comes from being able to share
Mhm.
our maybe something deep, dark secret, and then having someone share back either something similar that they've done or experience, or actually just say, hey, it's okay, like I still like you, and we
Mhm.
get our self-esteem that way. And
Mhm.
having that experience, it helps people reduce that shame, right? And now once you reduce the shame, then you could tackle other things.
Okay, let me try this again then. Okay, let
Yeah.
me try it more time. Okay, so we had the speaking orb. You speak into what the thing is. You go out, right? And then you share that with everybody, the speaking orb of that situation. The
Mhm.
next one is the drawing, and you take a photo of the drawing. You come back and you
I love
share to everybody what that drawing orbs is. The
Mhm.
third thing is a situation where you have a role playing situation where you hit a button, and now they're in an environment where they have to talk to a sexual partner, and they have to communicate what their sexual desires are, and have that and make it be heard in a way that they feel safe and they feel heard and they feel received. So then they can go through that and they can actually work on the actual role playing scenario of I like it. Yeah, I have sexual desires around X, Y, and Z, as described in this drawing. Is it something that we could try, or whatever it is, but in a way that they can actually practice the communication of feeling heard and seen and communicating their sexual desires instead of covering up their shame and guilt and not feeling like they can express what their desires are. Would that be better?
So, yes, and I think there would be. So when you talk about the sexual desires, I think we're talking about two different populations here.
Sure.
So when I do sex therapy
Mhm,
with people, that's a whole nother can of worms.
mhm,
The book specifically gears is and the workshop is geared towards sex addicts.
mhm.
So really their sexual desires may not be the best. Do you know what I'm saying? And
Sure.
so I don't really care what their sexual I mean, I don't really care about them reaching their sexual desires.
Mhm,
Their but our sexuality is so it's so interesting because typically a lot of the things that we become sexually attracted to or aroused by sometimes correlate with past traumas.
mhm,
And so when we do a sexual fantasy timeline,
mhm.
there's or a sexual fantasy, drawing it out, we use that as a tool to correlate it with our trauma and say, hey, how did I learn that I like getting my toes sucked? You know what I'm saying? Like, where did that come from? And I'm not
Yeah,
saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm not making a
yeah,
judgment on that. That's just something that just came up. That's
uh-huh,
not an addiction. It's I'm just making that up. But where does that come from? And if we sort of deconstruct it, we can figure it out because we
mhm,
learn very early on about our sexuality. We learn about it, and we learn about relationships through our parents. So the goal is not achieving the sexual desire
mhm.
fantasy, but really the goal would be learning to have control over your sexuality versus sexuality having control over you.
Okay, okay, so then if I try that again, okay, and that's what I'm trying to understand. Because at first I thought it was the expression of your sexual desire, and then I thought it was about removing the shame and guilt around your sexual desire by being able to communicate that with people. But what
Well,
you're talking about.
because sometimes the sexual desire is not healthy or sometimes even legal.
Sure,
uh,
and it
right.
co completely valid, and the thing is when I'm trying to, like, interpret this in a virtual reality, metaversian kinda concept, trying to understand what is the goals and how do we use, virtual reality, the metaverse as a tool to allow this to happen better, easier, faster, right?
I think
And
all you need is one tweak. The
mhm,
last part,
yeah,
the tweak is doing it how we do it in real life.
mhm,
Having someone talk to the orb. I love that. I love the drawing idea.
mhm,
And then coming back as a small group,
mhm,
keeping a group small, and having, even if it's your fake name, right?
yeah,
Having maybe yours is D Dog, right? I don't know. And
sure,
D Dog is talking to me and sharing with me something, then I'm in that virtual group. I think that would be just as effective if
mm.
that would accomplish the goal in the same way.
Yeah, 'cause I could see how the group therapy would be super helpful, and I think it's one of those things, if I was looking at it and trying to reconstruct it again, we could just do the group therapy communications. I mean, that would totally work. The other one that would come up is just exposing yourself to a situation like that, in virtual reality, and then having a therapist guide you through what's your mental dialogue going on as you see that. And that could just be taking the drawings, putting it inside of a room, adding some sort of ambiance of music or scenery, and then having you walk through it, and then having you walk through resisting that situation, right? Same thing where in virtual reality, they do situations where they put you into a bar situation, and then you have to resist alcohol. And so that you basically build up, you have this predictive coding, right? Because we are prediction machines. And so you're constantly predicting the situation, right? And so you have your mental, what you're imagining the situation to be, right? And then you have the actual experience. So if you had a way to kind of simulate that in some sort of lo-fi way in VR and get that narrative out and then practice resisting that, then that would give you the mental resilience to be able to actually, in real life, when you experience something similar, you can reflect back on that virtual experience and then say, oh, I know this. Here's what I need to say. Here's what I need to do. And here's what I need to do to basically get out of this situation and resist this sexual addiction.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could see it working out differently for like a heroin addict or an alcoholic.
Mm.
I think trying it out on sex addicts would be pretty risky.
It's uniquely different, right? Because actually, let me ask you that question. What makes it different for the resistance of drug abuse and addictions of the kind?
It's a process addiction, right? So sex addiction is a process addiction, whereas drugs and alcohol are a chemical addiction. And a process addiction is you can create in your own brain the drug that you want. So it's dopamine, right? So you see process addictions with sex, with food, with gambling, with shopping, with hoarding. Those all can become process addictions. And so those ones become a little bit trickier because it takes more than just abstinence, right? We have to eat, we have to have sex, we have to buy things. We don't have to necessarily gamble, but some could argue with that on a good football game. Who knows? It depends who's playing, but we don't have to. You can those things you have to do at some point, because it's part of our just being human. But nobody has to drink. Nobody has to sniff up cocaine. Nobody has to do those things. So their treatment is different, and the sort of dynamic of it is different, if that makes any sense.
To a degree. So you're saying because one is something that you're going to constantly face, right? And then because it's a habit or it's a process versus a product, right? You can avoid if I don't have any Cheetos in my house, right? If I just get rid of all the food in my house, I'm never going to remove that temptation. Versus being in a situation where you're constantly coming around the opposite sex, then it's something that is a part of life, and because of that, it's more of a process. Am I understanding that correctly? Because I am having a hard time.
I think it works out more with like even pornography, things of that nature, where it's chronic dopamine hit, which can be very addictive, and it becomes a process addiction. So you have to eliminate pornography from someone's life completely if you have a pornography addiction. And if you have a sexual addiction or a love addiction, unfortunately, if there's females that are love addicts, we can't just get rid of all the males in the world, it's not going to be possible. Or females, because they're, not trying to be, see, I have like showed my own bias there. I'm not trying to speak just to heterosexual couples. We just can't get rid of people, we just can't get rid of people.
Yeah, there's the cold turkey, like cutting out smoking, like just stopping that, versus you're always gonna have to eat. You're always gonna have to be around people. You're always gonna have to live, right? So you gotta deal with it being a way of life.
That's right.
Yeah. Oh, it's beautiful. With all of this, with everything that you're doing, putting together the Sono centers and all these places and writing the books and everything else that you're doing in the space, what's your holy grail for all of this? Like, what is the big purpose? What is the big meaning for you? What is the flag at the top of the mountain look like for you?
I think about that sometimes. I had gone back to, so I guess I'll say it where I feel today. I don't think I'm ever going to reach the flag in the mountain. Again, to use a mountain analogy, there's always the false summit that people get to, and you're like, oh, damn, I think my life is going to be a continual false summit. And that's okay. And that's actually good, right? When we stop growing, we stop living in a way. I had gone back to I had gone back to school a few years ago for my PhD, and unfortunately, it has been an albatross. I have not. I finished my classes right before COVID. I just have not completed my dissertation, which is the ultimate, the grand finale. And I think even when so my PhD is sort of shifting gears. It's in counseling supervision. So my goal and what I'm doing now is doing clinical supervision is sort of my next step, and not doing as much clinical work myself. So I have more free time to teach and to sort of help new therapists sort of pave their own way. I'm really passionate about helping new therapists. I was really lucky when I was an intern to get sort of caught up with someone who actually who was my supervisor, and I still consider him a friend. Or I consider him a friend now, and he was just really cool and helped me sort of took me on and showed me what private practice was like. I was able to start my own private practice because I learned from him. And now I have the treatment center, and we have a team, and I really love the team approach. I love working as a team. I can't imagine being in private practice again. And really taking new therapists and coaching them and helping them realize, hey, you can have like a great career and you can do what you love and you don't have to be burnt out. And I could teach you and show you how to have like work-life balance and help people. So my goal next step is not doing as much clinical work with clients myself. Of course, I'm not gonna, if any of my clients hear this, I'm not abandoning anybody. I will, I will be there. They're grandfathered in, I would say. Oh, we're not allowed to see, this is where I'm trying to be, we're not allowed to say that word anymore. And I don't know another word to use. So, sorry about that.
They're locked in at yeah.
They're locked in as my clients. I'm very territorial over them anyway. But I guess my next step is more clinical supervision and finishing my PhD once and for all. Well, my goal is to graduate this June, so we will see. And I'm going to celebrate graduating this June by hiking up Mount Rainier with my fiance.
Nice. Climbing a new mountain, right? And opening a new
Yes,
chapter.
I decided. Yeah, usually I go abroad, but I want to keep it in the good old US of A this time.
That's cool. What's cool about that is you look at the hero's journey, right? You've gone around the loop, you've gone, and now you're at the stage of the hero's journey where you're the mentor, and your goal is to set up shop and to mentor other heroes that are climbing up the mountain to go around in the circle so that you can kind of create a path and say, these are the lessons that I've learned, and this is the things that I can do, and this is the best way to help and expand the impact that you have. And if that is the Holy Grail, I mean, besides getting a PhD, which is another mountain in and of itself, if that is the Holy Grail for you, which is basically having a mentoring practice and shepherding other clinical therapists up the mountain, what is the dragon? What is the great challenge that is seemingly so difficult to overcome? You don't know if you can do it.
Well, right now the dragon is referred to as the IRB, which is I'm trying to get it passed. It's a board at the university that decides if my research can be done or not. And at this moment, because I'm working with sex addicts as a population, they feel it is a high risk. So I am working to restructure my design so I could keep it at a lesser risk and get that dragon, slay that dragon. Say slay that dragon. That was a pretty big obstacle. COVID has been an obstacle.
Yeah.
With especially doing hands-on experiential work, since now it's virtual. But there's so many tools out there, and thank goodness for people like you who's taking life to a virtual realm, and we can be creative now. 20 years ago, I don't know what would have happened, but now we could still do some experiential work. I do sand tray online now, and I kind of like it better because I don't have to clean up the mess. So to be honest. So I think that's kind of has been a dragon, but I'm hoping it's starting to go back in its cave.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, it definitely shifted reality for everybody. And that IRB, I've heard horror stories of that and going through that practice. It's a process, right? There is the dragon of the red tape, is
Mhm.
alive. Well, and this has been an amazing podcast. Thank you so much, Christy, for coming on.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Did
And
it.
yeah, I know, we did it. We got there. We made it to the summit. With all of that being said, is there anything else you'd like to let people know about before you tell them how to get a hold of you?
Uh, you know, mental health, thank goodness, has come into the conversation in our culture, and it's something we can't be ashamed of. If you need help or you think you need help, ask.
Mhm.
There's always somebody that is willing to help,
Yeah.
but it takes that courage, right? It takes courage to do that. So I would say, to anybody that is struggling, be courageous and take a risk and do it with someone safe. Make sure it's a safe person.
Love it. Yeah, absolutely. Take that courageous step forward.
Hmm.
And if people want to get a hold of you or find out more about what you do or how they can find your book, how do they do that?
Oh yeah, you can go on to sonocounseling.com, which is our website. You could find me or any of my teammates there. They're awesome. Everyone's great. We work together. You can find the book Transforming the Addictive Mind through Sono Press, or you can go on Amazon.
Beautiful. Christy, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for
Yay!
coming on the
Thanks,
show.
Dylan. Have a
Cheers to
wonderful
you.
weekend.
Yes,
Yes,
absolutely.
listen, I only drank half of it. Well, just
I barely made the thought of mine. This was
yeah.
beautiful. Have a
We
blessed
made
and
it
beautiful
through.
weekend. I know. All right, darling. I will see you
All
on
right.
the other side.
I will see you on the other side.
All
Hang
right.
in. All right.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Heroes of Reality podcast. Check out heroesofreality.com for more episodes. While you're there, you can also take the Heroes quiz to find out what kind of hero you are. Or, if you have a great story and want to be on the podcast, tell us why your hero's journey will inspire others. Thank you for listening.